Okay, let's get started. The Ramban is from the beginning of his Chidushim on Maseches Megillah, and the truth is, I spent quite a bit of time in the yeshivas. They never talked about this Ramban. If you were talking any serious topic in Gemara, Ramban was always on the table. And yet, when people spoke about Purim, etc., this Ramban never came up. But my father had taught it to me, and it always caught my imagination. Years later, interestingly enough, I heard from Professor Bernard Septimus from Harvard told me that in his days as a graduate student in Boston, the Rav every year used to teach this Ramban. And I'll hit this when I come to the point that the Rav that was crucial to the Rav, I'll point that out. But he also was captivated by that Ramban and taught it every single year. Okay, so let's go to the videotape, as we say, our version of it. Whoops, no, I don't want that. Share screen. Okay, let me get it up here. No, this one. Okay, share screen. Okay, we got the screen up? Okay, we're good. Okay, so it's in the beginning of Maseches Megillah. And what the Ramban talks about is not so much about the story of the palace intrigue. Rather, what the Ramban cares about is how do we have the halacha that we have today, that there are two separate celebrations of Purim, and that's what he wants to discuss. As we'll see, I'm telling you in advance, there are obvious problems that are seemingly insoluble with what Ramban says. Nonetheless, and the Ramban has to be aware of them and is aware of them. And nonetheless, he just keeps on going forward. So that's a fascination all in its own right. What pushes him to say what he says past obvious difficulties? And we'll see it as we go along. So let's jump in.
It's at the highest.
Really?
Okay. Didn't I mute everybody? What's going on here?
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right. So he starts out that walled cities celebrate on the 15th and open cities celebrate on the 14th. And the criteria for an open and walled city is, were they in that situation back in the days of Yehoshua ben Nun when Jews first came to Eretz Yisrael and really the beginning of our history? So Ramban says, Ani tamei me'od, I'm amazed, I have a difficulty. Mara'u al kacha ma higia alehem. Of course, he borrows a phrase from the Megillah. He says, what did the Chachamim, what did they see? La asos Yisrael agudos b'mitzvah zo, that we split the Jewish people up into two separate parties. Va'afal gav deleka hacham mishum losas go to do. What's losas go to do? Losas go to do is a verse in Re'eh, and there it simply means that there was an old custom among people that it is an expression of mourning. When somebody in the family died, they would literally make a cut into their skin. And the Torah says, you don't do that. You don't do that, okay? However, according to Chazal, Losas Godedu turned into a play upon words, where it says, Los asu agudos agudos. You don't split the Jewish people up into distinct groups.
Good.
Okay, lots of luck with that, okay? So what's the halacha? The halacha is, it's Abai and Rava argue, is it permissible or is it conceivable that we have two distinct courts in one city and each one decides on an issue the opposite of the other? So Abai says it's impossible. Rava allows that it's possible. But everybody agrees, as the Ramban's going to say in a second, that if you have two courts in two separate cities, each court decides for its own locale, and that does not mean that the Jewish people are split up into separate groups. Namely, it still comes under Torah Achasi Yelachem. It's still one Torah, despite the fact that within the one Torah, separate courts can actually, for their locales, can decide differently. In the same locale, the authority of Torah has to be uniform. I mean, that's the way Rova learns. In the same locale, the authority of Torah has to be uniform. So Afagav the Leka Hacha Mishum Los is go to do, right? Because if we say the cities, the open cities are celebrated on the 14th, and the walled cities celebrate on the 15th, we don't have that problem. Why? The Havalahu Shnei Batei Dinim B'Shtei Ayaros. It's like having two separate courts in separate cities deciding differently. Okay. It's really in the first chapter in Yevamos. Mikol Makom Lechatchila Lama Chilkum L'Shtei Kitos. Why did they ever start to make this division? Hechan Matzinu B'Torah Mitzvah Chaluka B'Kach. We don't find in the Torah any such mitzvah. V'HaTorah Amra Torah Achas Mishpat Echad Yiheh Lachem. Okay, you'll say, well, it's a chachamim. Well, it's a standard principle. V'chol the tikun rabbanon, ke'en the oraisa tikun. Any takana that the chachamim make, they try to make it in a way that the Torah might have actually made the same takana. So if the Torah in general only has one uniform law across the Jewish people, it seems to be out of character that the Chachamim would make a law that divides the Jewish people into two groups. V'shema yesh lomar, now he's going to give the usual answer. Lefi shena'asa hanes b'Shushan b'Yudalit. You might say that the miracle in Shushan was on the 14th. But Noach Shalahem, the day they rested, Haya b'Chamisha Asar, was on the 15th. Therefore, Kav'u l'Chamisha Asar Yom b'Yom shehischilu bo. Okay, so in Shushan, the first time they rested was on the 15th. They get 15. Ulefi ki she'ikar hanes haya b'Shushan, Kav'u imahem kamos hanichbadim dahano krochim hamukofim. Because the main miracle was in Shushan, they established in Shushan, along with Shushan, the more honorable, the more respectable or distinguished cities, and those are the walled cities. Namely, they're really genuine. They're genuine metropoli. Okay. Sha'ar kol ha'ayaros and other cities. Shahayel Hanes Shalahem B'Yud Gimel on the 13th day, V'Noach Shalahem B'Yud Daled, and they rested on the 14th. K'va'uhu B'Yom Shalahem Shehischilu, K'derech She'iralahem, the way it happened in that first year of the very first Purim of the story, Kach Kavuasam, they established the hem forever. He says, that's our usual explanation. Everybody accepts it that way. And he says, not by me. The 14th day in Shushan was just, you might say, frosting on the cake. The real miracle in Shushan was like everybody else on the 13th. They should be celebrating on the 14th. Even though in the day of the miracle, namely in the day of the drama of Purim, they did everything on the 15th. Okay. In subsequent years, they should be on the 14th with everybody else. Or maybe Shushan Yom Tov b'Yudalev v'Tesvav, both days. Hoel v'naseh b'hem hanes. So that's his question. He is not satisfied with the traditional answer. And now he says, Ukashe'iyanti b'chsuvim nisyashev li ha'inyan yafeh. When I looked in the psukim, I finally understood it. It's kind of amazing that despite the difficulties in with what he's going to say, he is the only one I know that gives a careful analysis of the progression of these sentences. By the time we're reading the Megillah in Shul, okay, by the time they get to chapter 9 and they read these sentences, they sort of go by. And you pay no attention, but watch how he picks it up. Okay, so here we go. Once I looked at the psukim, I understand why. לפי שהוא דבר ברור שבזמנו של נס זה כבר נפקדו ישראל ועלו לארץ ברישיון כורש ונתיישבו בעריהם. This is in the beginning of the period of Shivat Zion, the return of Jews from the Babylonian exile under Koresh. ואף על פי שאמר המן, ישנו עם אחד מפוזר ומפרד בין העמים, מכל מקום, nonetheless, אנשי כנסת הגדולה, עם רוב ישראל בארץ היו, ושוב לא עלו מהם אלא מעטים מן עזרא. He says most of the Jewish people were in Eretz Yisrael. וכשציווה אחשוורוש להשמיד, להרוג ולאבד, היו הפרזים והעיירות שאין להם חומות סביב, בספק בסכנה גדולה. שלא יעלו עליהם האויבים יוצא מן המוקפים. So Ramban postulates that most of the Jews were in Eretz Yisrael in this period, and this, by the way, this is before Ezra, and only few people came up in Ezra.
Absolutely.
With Ezra, yeah, it's impossible. I'll mention it in a moment. So when Achashverosh said to kill all Jews, everybody in an open city was in a terrible danger because had no walls for protection. Namely, the Jews in the walled cities, okay, had greater protection. Namely, was afforded by the walls. But in open cities, they were open to the predations of anybody who came to kill them. Okay, so this is obviously difficult, and the Ran points up to it. The Ran immediately says, "What do you mean? Only 40,000 people came with Rishon Koresh, with Koresh's permission. Most of the Jews remained in Bavel. In fact, that is the quote unquote the shame of Shivat Zion that so few Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael."
Yeah,
okay, it's obvious question. Not only that, the Ram points out another obvious question. Why is it obvious that the walls are greater protection? If it's a purely Jewish city, yeah, the walls give bigger protection. But if it's a city with mixed populations, the walls might end up being now a trap because it's harder to leave the city. Okay, it's not obvious. Apparently, yeah. Ramban talks about that aspect later, and he's saying most cities were Jewish cities. That's how he gets it. But the issue that most Jews were in Eretz Yisrael, it's so obvious from the book of Ezra. Ain't so. It ain't so. 40,000 people is nothing compared to the size of the Jewish people. But we'll let him consider. We'll let him talk further. The Ramban is surely aware of this and still pushes right through the difficulty. Okay. Ukishinyan, he's talking about Mukafim now. Ukinyan Shamalahem B'Sefer Ezra. You have to remember that Ezra and Nehemiah used to be one book. They weren't always divided into two books the way we have it. So Ramban referred to it as Sefer Ezra, but it's really in our Tanakh now, it's Ezra and Nehemiah. What does it talk about? It talks about Nehemiah's return to Yerushalayim, which had no wall, and the city was always subject to danger and marauding by surrounding people. Now Nehemiah came back, and now they started to effectively rebuild the walls of Yerushalayim. And this long quote here describes the frustration of the surrounding people that they are getting an effective wall. So from that, Ramban concludes that a walled city didn't face the same danger as an open city. The open cities were really in danger because anybody could come and attack the open cities, villages, whatever, whereas walled cities had protection. That's the distinction he makes between open and walled cities. And now he says as follows. As we know, they fought everybody. And they fought on Biyom Shlosha Asar L'Chodesh Hador, V'Noach B'Arba Asar Bo, and they rested on the 14th day. V'Aso Yom Mishter Simcha. Okay. B'Shel Shushan Asu Gam Hayom Mimacharas Hanei Shalahem V'Zeh Hayom B'Shas Hanei Spolvad. And now he says something kind of amazing. And it's so obvious once he says it, it's amazing you never pick it up on your own.
Yeah.
Amdu prazim v'nahog me'atzmam la'asos yom arba'o asar simcha u'mishta v'yom tov. In future years, the open cities made their own parties. Avomu kafin lawasu klum. They didn't do anything. Lifisha haya hanes gadol b'prazim v'haya alehem hasakana yaseh k'deprishis. V'zehu shekasuv al kein haYehudim haprozim hayashvim b'yovsei orei haprozos osim es yom arba asar l'chodesh adar simcha mishta v'lo hizkaru mukafin lo hizkaru kan mukafin klal. Amazing. The first mention of subsequent celebrations in future years only refers to the open cities. Okay? It's amazing. And he says they did it on their own. Why does he say did it on their own? Because subsequent verses talk about Mordechai and Esther establishing the actual days of Purim as a party day. Okay? So this verse that refers to the open cities, it means they did it completely on their own. Okay. Achar Zman, later on, once this, so it got known that what? That the open cities were partying on Purim on the 14th in subsequent years. Achar Zman, la'achar shehe'ir HaKadosh Baruch Hu eineihem u'matzu smach min haTorah. After God enlightened their eyes and they found a hint in the Torah, the phrase "enlighten their eyes" is a phrase from the Yerushalmi. I have it after this whole quote. I have the Yerushalmi if you want to look at it. Amad Mordechai obeys dino v'ra'u devreihem shel prozim. So Mordechai and his court saw that what the open cities were doing on their own, shero'ui hanes hazel la'asos lo zecher ledoros. After they found a hint in the Torah, then Mordechai and his court decided to make a celebration for this miracle forever. And they established this on all the Jewish people, not just for the Prazim, on all the Jewish people, because everybody was in a safek of a sakana. Everybody was genuinely in danger. And now he says the most amazing thing. Why did they separate the two? Their miracle was greater. And here, they were the ones that started the mitzvah that they created the Yom Tov. So the idea was to give recognition to the open cities who celebrated and who created the Yom Tov. We give them the recognition that they started the mitzvah. Therefore, the 14th is separate from the 15th. Lefichach kavu Yom Tov shel prazim b'yomon v'yishiyeh miyuchad lahem v'shel mukafim kavu b'yom Noach shel Shushan. And that's why they made the walled cities. They made the walled cities like Shushan. They made the walled cities on the 15th. V'zehu shekosuv. See, now it's in the Psukim. Only now does Mordechai start discussing the establishment of Yom Tov, of the holiday. V'zehu shekosuv v'yichtov Mordechai es hadvorim ho'ele v'yishlach sforim el kol hayudim asher b'chol midinos hamelech Achashverosh hakrovim v'harachokim. Everybody. L'kayem alahem l'hiyos osim es yom arba asor v'es yom chamish asor. Kolomar shalach lehem shikablu kulam la'asos zecher lenes. ולא יאמרו הרחוקים משושן ומארץ ישראל, לא היו המון וסייעתו בואים עלינו. וקיבלו ישראל עליהם הדבר. This is the part that the Rav always emphasized. Mordechai and his court understood that the danger was for everybody, and even people far away from Shushan and Eretz Yisrael, they were in danger too. And therefore, all Jews are to celebrate on the 14th and the 15th. The Rav always emphasized that the lesson of Ramban is that just because Jews are in danger in one locale, it automatically means that Jews are in danger everywhere. Now, if you think back, and you think how the Rav lived through the Second World War, and he was here in the United States,
It's against the law.
supposedly safe, right? He understood from the Ramban, not really safe at all. Okay, wherever there's danger for all of us. Okay, and that was the point that the Rav always emphasized. That's what Beryl Septimus had told to me. And he and Zehu Shekasuv, okay, I mean, it's fantastic, really. Zehu Shekasuv, v'kibel ha'Yehudim es asher hechelu la'asos v'es asher kasav malahem. Klamar, shekiblu ma shehechelu ha'prozim la'asos be'atzmam. Uma shekasav Mordechai shetzivo lechulam la'asos kein. All Jews accepted the fact of what the Prazim, the open cities in Eretz Yisrael, did on their own, that they were in danger. They accepted that, and they accepted what Mordechai told them about celebrating as everywhere in the world, and the walled cities on the 15th. V'nasan tam. Here you go. Ki Haman ben Hamdasa. So rare kol ha-Yehudim, chashav al ha-Yehudim la'abdam. So what does Ramban say? Hosif b'cha milas kol shehaya hanes lekulam afilu l'mukofim. Now you can hear what the Rav is saying. Okay. V'hana de'amrina b'gemara mid'prazim b'yadalid mukofim b'tesvav, right? Shelo huskan arba'asar ela l'prazim she'yischilu bo. And only the surrounded cities are on the 15th. Umakshi, the Gemara asks, Ve'ema mukafim klal lo. Maybe the cities that are mukafim, that are walled cities, they don't have to celebrate at all. Shelo tiknu elamashi is chiluba. Ve'ishiv, the Gemara concludes, Atu lav Yisrael ninhu. L'shloach lemiktzas Yisrael v'lo l'kulam. And that's the Ramban is speaking when he says that. And now he goes back to quoting the Gemara. Va'od mehoda v'yad kush ksiv. Mordechai sent it to everybody. And now the Ramban explains, V'chsiv b'mitzvos shel Mordechai el kol hayudim asher b'chol midinos hamelch Achashverosh hakarovim v'harachokim v'haino mehoda v'yad kush. Okay. All right. So now the holiday is developing. There were people who did not want to celebrate openly. People were afraid to celebrate publicly until Mordechai told them that the queen, Master Hamalka, told them you can party publicly. And now they were no longer afraid. We have permission from the queen. V'zehu shekasu b'tichtav Esther Hamalka Mordechai Hayudi is kol tokav l'kayim as igeres hapurim ho'ela as l'kayim ho'ela. So they did it. Is it really ho'ela or is it hazo shenis? I don't know. I got to go back and look at the verse. Okay, but the point is they wrote a second time. Okay. And now he says, Zehu tam chiluk hatakano liprozim umukofim. This is why we separate the takano to open cities and walled cities. V'hana de amrinam prazim mukafim dichsil gabe Megillah dehani migli v'hani michsu. That open and walled cities, some are open and some are protected, or it's not clear what the Gemara has in mind by that phrase. Or is it because the real reason, because these places are protected and these places are not? So the Ramban concludes from that second choice, because of the danger to the city. The Islahu Mukafan Hatzala, the Mignu B'chomasan V'nilchamim. Jewish cities and the walled cities have protection, and therefore they can fight off and defend the city. Even in the walled cities, there are more places to hide from the enemy. Okay. So that's the analysis of these psukim, that there were steps in establishing the holiday of Purim. The first step is the open cities doing it on their own. Second step, the second step has two parts. One is eyes are enlightened God enlightened their eyes from the Torah, and then Mordechai realizes that they have to make it for everyone, open cities and walled cities. And they open cities keep it because of the great danger, the great miracle, and that they did it on their own. They give them the credence and the credit for having appreciated to make a day of simcha. That's the first thing he says. There's one thing left to explain. Achshav be'ranu haksuvim. We now have explained all the verses. V'tam hatakana shechilku hanes l'shnei yamim. Why they turned the miracle into 2 days. One would think what is the reason of this formality of the rule that a walled city, we asked that it have a wall back in the days of Yehoshua ben Nun? The most ordinary logic is if you agree with Ramban's account of where the relative dangers were, then the criteria should be that it's a walled city in the day of Shushan, in the day of the actual story of Purim. Why are we making a criteria that it had a wall in the days back of Yehoshua ben Nun? Okay, even if it doesn't have a wall now. Okay. Why is that? And he says, well, he says the country was desolate. I'll talk about this in a second with a drop more detail. ולא ראוי שיהיו ירושלים עיר הקודש וכל ערי יהודה וישראל הבצורות נידונות כערי הפרזים. It was like a shanda if all Eretz Yisrael looked like a plain, ordinary, open villages and not established cities. So therefore, v'hechziru ho'inyan limei Yehoshua. V'chalku ben ha-mukafin chomo mimos Yehoshua ben Nun l'she'enan mukafin chomo. Zehu she'amru b'Yerushalmi, Rabbi Simon b'shem Yeshua ben Levi, chalku chavod la'eretz Yisrael. Ki ha'isach ha'reva ba'osan hayamin. They moved the criteria back to walled cities from Yeshua ben Nun to sort of to place Eretz, to give the cover to Eretz Yisrael that is the center, quote unquote, center of the universe as far as we're concerned. V'talu aso b'mei Yehoshua ben Nun. V'hanukkah deprecious mishum covered beyond. Okay. It's kind of amazing. So let's take a little stock of what went on here. First thing is the Ramban creates a rather difficult scenario as to the actual events. But even before that, it's clear. Ramban shifts the miracle of Purim from not from the palace intrigue to the fighting. He keeps saying the nace was on the 13th and the 14th. We are so wrapped up in the story and the intrigue that we think that there is a hidden miracle in the story. But Ramban puts the heart of the nace in the fighting, that the Jews now fought back and defeated their enemies. That's number one. Number two, the difficult part is that Ramban places the main drama in Eretz Yisrael. As though all the Jewish people are there, that's the main body politic in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. And they are the ones that are in the great danger, okay? With that last remark, it's kind of funny. The main body politic is in Eretz Yisrael, but the place is still desolate that they have no walled cities. So, I mean, he's sort of creating one axis. Well, he's assuming one thing after another. If the main body politic is in Eretz Yisrael, you would imagine that they had built up cities, and he's saying no, they weren't. Very hard. And the issue of the main body politic in Eretz Yisrael is difficult completely on its own, because we know that's not the case. That's number one. Number two, this casual comment, hey near a la'achar sha'kodesh baruch hu he'ira nehem min haTorah. Then Mordechai and Beis Dino. That's really Yerushalmi. What's the story in Yerushalmi? The Yerushalmi says that Mordechai and Esther, wait, I have it right here. Let's go back to it. Let's go back to it. Take a second. Yeah, right. Okay, I got it. Mordechai and Esther wrote to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, they're presumably in Eretz Yisrael, shall we make a permanent holiday of this? And the Yerushalmi describes that the Chachamim and the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah are very much endowed to create a new mitzvah. Okay? Namely, the story of Esther is the first story of Torah Shabbal Peh in a way, okay, because of the Takanos Chachamim. They said, how can we add another mitzvah? So then the story that says that they went back and forth till God enlightened their eyes. They found a hint in the Torah that it's appropriate to do this. They told Mordechai and Esther. They told Mordechai and Esther to do this, okay? So that little phrase in Ramban, La'achar she'nir HaKadosh Baruch Hu Saneim, is not talking about Mordechai and Esther. It's talking about the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, okay, that gave them permission, so to say, to go ahead and establish a holiday. The Anshe Knesset HaGedolah don't establish the holiday. Mordechai and Esther did. Okay, all right, you got to realize that. And now they honor the open cities. Let me ask you, if you take a look, what kind of celebration was the open cities? I say there was nothing, I try to pick my words carefully. There was nothing religiously or halachically mature about the celebrations of the open cities. They simply partied. All right? They might have, of course they thank God. And when they said L'chaim, they thanked the Rebbeinu Shalom. You can trust me on that, okay? But I say it was just an ordinary party for people who face terrible danger, were about to be annihilated, and a year later they find themselves, we're here. Not only that, but nafochu. We are where they thought they were going to be. They were going to wipe us out, rather we defeated them. And why do I prove this? What's my proof that this is not like a sophisticated, religiously sophisticated celebration? If you take a look, In the Prozim, when the Megillah first does it, it refers to Mishloach Manos. It does not refer to Matanos Lo'ev Yonim. So I said it was purely instinctual, purely untutored. Okay? Namely, the first time they threw a party, friends got together and they celebrated. Okay? Now, the poor people, they went through the same experience, right? They went through the same experience, but they didn't have what to celebrate with. So that indicates to me that the first celebration was instinctive. In the best sense of the word, it was instinctive, but it was no more than instinctive. It was pure response to how life had turned around for them without any high thoughts. They were happy to be here, okay? And their friends joined with them. Matanos Levionim only come in when Mordechai and Esther create the holiday. And they insist on Matanos Levionim, okay? Because now they have, Mordechai and Esther have the higher view. So it's so interesting. The Ramban creates an unbelievably ideal reconstruction of the story, okay? The cities on their own, they start Amcha, playing good people. And it takes place in Eretz Yisrael, mostly, right? And if the Anshe Knesses HaGedolah are in Eretz Yisrael, they saw the parties. And they may or may not have joined the parties, but if they did it only as private individuals. They didn't do it as members of a court, as Gedolei Hador. They did it as people. Okay. It is only afterwards when God, and now you have to remember, Anshe Knesses HaGedolah don't jump ahead. Ordinary people go ahead and start a celebration. Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, by definition, hold back. Why? Leaders of the people, the masters of the law, are always supposed to be conservative. Law doesn't change at the drop of a dime. Okay? They have to think it through. They have to decide, is there permission from the Torah to do such a thing? Once they do it, they then hand it off to whom? To Mordechai and Esther, because they don't have the big picture. They only know the picture in Eretz Yisrael. It's Mordechai and Esther who have the big picture of knowing what went on throughout the whole kingdom and what the danger was to not only the Jews in the open cities, but the Jews everywhere. Only they have it. It's kind of amazing. So, and it's sort of instinctual, and it's clearly an ideal. Okay, and the most ideal part of it, all right, is when Mordechai and Esther give credence to the people who started the mitzvah, the people who celebrated, and who celebrated out of what? Out of instinct, as an instinctual response to the miracle, and that years later, they were here. And the enemies were subjugated when they were supposed to be completely annihilated. We don't imagine Takonas Chachamim in this way. That it starts bottom up. Our view of Takonas Chachamim is always top down. And here we have a case where people who are unsophisticated, by unsophisticated, I don't mean culturally, I mean in the Yiddishkeit. Instinct, Amcha. They start the parties, correct? And now it's left for the Chachamim to respond, not only to realize that they are correct, but they end up giving them the credit that they showed the way. That's why we celebrate on the 14th, the open cities, and on the 15th, And on the 15th, they celebrate the walled cities. Okay. Amazing Ramban, despite all the difficulties. Now, it's always captures the mind, what catches one's interest, is when a person doesn't let the facts get in his way, and he knows all the facts. Okay. Ramban knew that most Jews were not in Eretz Yisrael. But when he first wrote this, the idea, if you know Ramban elsewhere, that the only religiously meaningful event, life, occurrence, it has to have Eretz Yisrael at the center. In Ramban's thought, the only real Avodas Hashem that is the end in itself and that realizes its true meaning is in Eretz Yisrael. It permeates all of his writings. And that's why, and so when the context for his just shifting the story is not just an arbitrary remark, it actually reflects his whole outlook on the centrality of Eretz Yisrael and the life of Avodas Hashem. So that's it. Yeah. That's the Purim talk. Why am I giving the Purim talk? Because next week I got to go to the doctor. So we gave it this week. So we're taking a week off next week.
The concept of Mara de Atra appears already in the Braita. When it became only after the Dekrufat Geonim became the real expression, because then there is no Geonim anymore, etc. Right?
We talked about that when I talked about the during the Gaonic period. The Gaonim really sort of ruled the roost in the sense that they appointed judges in cities and everything. But if you remember when we read the Rambam's introduction to the Mishnah Torah, he said there's no such thing that a decision by the Gaonim is obligatory on all Jews. Right? Good. He said a court in one city, every court is responsible for its own locale. Okay. Namely, we decide issues based on our understanding of the Talmud Bavli. That's what he says. And after that, all authority is local.
Has anyone ever suggested to do Shnei Yemei Purim?
Well, all the yeshiva boys and go to Tel Aviv on the 14th and come back to Yerushalayim on the 15th. If that's what you're talking about.
Good one. Thank you very much.
That's right. It's well known. It's well known. They all do that. Yeah.
Very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Shakor.
Okay.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
Okay, be well.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah?
Short comment about this concept of bottom-up establishment of holidays or whatever.
Right.
So I'm thinking about the spontaneous celebration of the establishment of State of Israel. I mean, those famous pictures.
Obvious. So obvious. Yeah, it's clear. It's clear.
Everybody was dancing in the streets. So
it's obvious. To me, it's the most obvious thing from the Ramban. Most obvious thing from the Ramban. No question. When you read it, it jumps off the page, right?
Right.
Jumps right off the page. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. No question. Yeah. I mean, doesn't have no right here. How many? Maybe that's why it's suppressed in general, because nobody wants to teach that. Maybe, but yeah, 100%. Right now. Okay.
All right. Good luck.